Hi, welcome to episode 78 of the American Tributaries podcast, where to break out of the bubbles we all live in, we're using modern technology to explore the various currents of people in our great country, kind of like a 21st century Lewis and Clark journey. I'm your host, Michael Whidden, here in Brooklyn, New York, and thank you for joining me in this exploration of America. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Sara Stahl, who lives about 450 miles west of me in the Port Clinton, Ohio area, where she is a social worker in the education system. We were connected by a mutual friend, Carrie Lynch. So, Carrie, thank you for bringing us together. And Sara, thank you for joining me today. How are you doing? And could you share a bit of your story?
Hi, Michael. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me. A bit of my story. I was born and raised in Port Clinton, Ohio, which is a rather small town, tourist town. The population usually triples in the summer, but in the winter it's pretty small. I kind of followed a Midwestern path back in the 80s. I graduated from high school in 1990, and everybody was going to college. And I look back at that now, and I don't think I really questioned what I wanted to do. It was just kind of the expectation of what was next. So I went to college and took a class to figure out what I wanted to do and found out I should be a social worker. So I was like,
All
okay. So I did that and graduated and moved back home and got a job and kind of followed the path that a lot of my friends did, probably except for Carrie. So a lot of
right.
us got married and bought a house and had children and worked and found our jobs. And then I think we often talk now in our 50s about how blindly we made all those decisions. And not that there's regret, but that there was a lack of understanding that we could choose differently if we wanted to. So, one of my biggest things with my own children has always been, do what makes you happy, what you want to do, not what the expectation is of everyone around you. Um, and so I moved away from Port Clinton a couple times into different towns in Ohio, but we are right on Lake Erie. And I grew up on the water. As a kid, we went boating into the islands. So I really missed that and moved back to be close to my parents to help take care of them. And I do love this small town. It's a great place to raise kids and to be, and it's a wonderfully supportive community. So yeah, so that was kind of the trajectory of my life. And um, but now I'm a single mom and have been for most of their life. And so learned kind of how to navigate that as a parent with three children on a social worker salary. So I'm probably pretty good
Oh,
at
boy.
problem solving and and working through problems and figuring things out. So
Wow. God bless, because I have three kids, but I've got a wife to like kind of split the responsibilities with, and it is overwhelming. Probably every day. So I can't imagine what you go through.
well, it was very. Just said to my daughter the other day. My oldest is in education. She's a teacher at the same school I work at, and she got pregnant in college. She's now married to the father, and my granddaughter is delightful. But she always says to me, Mom, how did you do? And I said, it's like anything else. You just do it because that's what you do. But I think I do sometimes feel like a lot of it was a blur because they were 7, 3, and a year old when their father left. So it was, and I was working full time, and I would not have made it without my parents. I always say that they were a lifeline for me when it came to, taking care of the kids. They helped a lot. Um, so, I just think you do it because there's no other choice and you do your best.
Yeah. Wow. So, and how may I ask how old your kids are now?
Yeah, my daughter is 24.
Hmm.
My middle son is 19. He graduated last year and he works in the welding industry. He went to a vocational
Hmm.
school. And then my youngest
Hmm.
will graduate this year. He wants to go to school in Michigan. He loves golf, so he wants to become a golf pro. That's his goal right now.
Okay.
So, um, but yeah, so the youngest is 18. So next
Wow. Okay.
year I'm
Well.
going to be an empty nester. What's that going to
Wow.
be
Watch
like?
out. Then the keg parties start.
Sarah Stahl's going to be on the town.
Yeah, look out.
Big Port
Well,
Clinton. Everyone, pay attention.
you'll need a social worker yourself.
When you see me written up in the paper.
Sarah's gone a little off the tracks.
Social worker Sarah has gone rogue.
Well, but it's interesting. You raised an interesting point, which is, I think that at least I grew up probably wanting to I guess get out of where my circumstances. So I worked as hard as I could to not accept the whatever it was destiny would have pushed me into. Um, but I think it seems that like for this generation, there seems to be even more possibilities than ever. I don't know if you perceive that same thing, but like my daughter is 17, she's our oldest. Then I have two boys, 13 and 11, and it seems that like there's an ability to kind of learn about almost any trade, and change jobs in a way that's never been available before. I don't know that it'll be easy to do, but I think it's easier than it ever was before.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I think one of the things is, I had my son, my husband that I was just recently married to passed away last year.
Oh, so
And
sorry.
thank you. And he um, was a Marine. He had been a war veteran, and when COVID hit, he started drinking really, really heavily and passed away from his alcoholism. But the thing is that I'm at a stage in my life where my kids are going, and I have the choice to do whatever I want, which I've never really allowed myself to have before. So I'm actually kind of excited about the future. I look forward to, um, I love my children and they're a big part of my life. But I also look forward to, because I kind of want to like get a little piece of property somewhere and build a tiny house. I'm all about tiny houses right now. I think they're pretty cool. I mean, really, how
Hmm.
many spatulas do you need? You only need one. You don't need five spatulas. You don't need 10 mixing bowls. You need one. So I like the idea of tiny house living. Um, so I'm kind of excited about this next phase because I think for the first time I'm allowing myself to determine what that is.
Yeah, it sounds like you
Better
can move
late
to New
than
York City
never,
because
right?
we're all about tiny house living.
Yeah, it's true. I remember the
I have an
first time I went
1,100
to
square foot apartment.
I remember the first time I visited Carrie when Carrie and I had been friends all through high school and we went to college together. And then she left college and went to stay with her cousins in Connecticut and live in the city. And, Carrie's just one of those people where she just decides to do something. And pretty soon, before you know it, she's working at VH1, So I used to tease her. I'm like, Carrie, she's like, what? But I was at her apartment, her very first apartment she lived in, and I was pregnant with my second son. And I went to use the shower, and it was so tiny, like you could not sit with you forward on the toilet. You had to sit to the side. And then just
Hmm.
taking a shower, like if you turned around, you'd hit it and then knock it all over. So it was my first actual experience of how tiny the living could be in the city. It was fun. I mean, we were in our 20s, so but it made me laugh. So much different,
Yeah. Charming.
Yes.
Quaint
That's what they
is
would
another
say
way to
as
put it.
realtors.
Well, but I think and I think this is like one of the things that I've been trying to embrace is this is trying to be aware, because I refer to the pizza pie of knowledge, and I'll say like the one slice represents what you know, two slices represent what you don't know, and there's five slices where you don't even know what you don't know. And I think that a lot of that, what you don't not even know you don't know, is rooted in like I guess the fact that we're kind of like we're all egocentric, like, and that's not a criticism, it's just we all see the world from our own perspective, and there are so many people living in so many different contexts, and the context of somebody in New York is very different than like in Ohio or Wyoming or Florida. And like the New York life might not necessarily make any sense to some people, but you also have to, I guess, see the different ways of living in New York first to kind of understand it, but also just to understand, like, for me, like I like New York because I like having all the people around me, and it can certainly be overwhelming, but I'm pretty introverted. So having all those people around kind of forces me to be with other people, and it feels better that way. And there's just so much, it can be overwhelming if you're not if you don't have is the problem is there's so many people doing so many things that it can be a little bit competitive or a little, so it's kind of like if you're doing some kind of line of profession, maybe more like office oriented, but there's just so many people out there doing it that you really kind of have to, you can't just like kind of, you can't just like kind of like you can't half-ass it, for lack of a better word. You really got to,
Yeah.
if you want to be at the top of something, you're going to have to probably dedicate your life to it. And that can be a grind and that can be bad, but if you love what you're doing, you really can kind of, I think, make a difference, because there's so many people and such density that you can really kind of, things can go viral in a good way.
Well, and I feel very fortunate too because with Carrie living in Brooklyn, and then my other friend Jen lives in Chicago, and they're always so welcoming. So when I come to see them, they very much take me on how they live their life. It's not really taking you to see sites, although she did take me to see where 9/11 and all that kind of stuff. But her and Jerome will take me to the good restaurants they like that maybe I wouldn't
Yeah.
otherwise get to see. And I always tease her that they eat so late at night
Yeah.
because like they're eating at 8, and I'm like, you realize I'm normally in my pajamas at this time. So, but and then with Jerome being from France, and I remember the first time I met him. Um, he obviously is into wine, and he had brought out a port which I had never had before, and he gives it to me in a glass, and so the girl from Ohio who goes to the bar just starts to drink it and goes, no, no, it's a sipping wine. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
So having the comfort to be able to like kind of learn from each other, and to meet her friends and to experience the life that they have, I feel really fortunate to be able to see that from that perspective, and to do it in a comfortable environment rather than just showing up by
Yeah.
myself. It's nice.
Yeah. What's interesting is, though, Ohio is so close to New York, but I think most New Yorkers, and maybe probably a lot of people on the East Coast, if they travel, they're going to go more north south to get to like warmer weather than they are going to go west. I don't know if that's an
Yeah.
accurate description of it, but I've never gone west. I mean, I've gone to State College, Pennsylvania for football camp once, but never past that. And I apologize for bringing up Penn State to somebody from
It's
Ohio.
okay. It's all right. I'm fine. I'm not into football, so you're safe. You can say whatever you want, and I'll just nod.
Okay. So, but for somebody from Ohio, like, what is your vacationing like? Where do you drive to for holidays
Well,
and stuff?
interestingly enough, in a couple weeks we're on spring break, and my mom passed away a year ago too, and my dad lives next door, and so he booked a little house in Port St. Joe, Florida, and so my dad and my kids and their significant others and my grandkids are all driving down in 2 weeks to Port St. Joe. So you might want to check on me in April to make sure I've survived it. But typically, when teachers have spring break and that they go to Florida, typically, um, I would say like Chicago and New York are places that we go because again they're relatively close. I've been out to California, but it's been years. Um, I have some friends who are big travelers. As a single mom and working as a social worker, that wasn't something I could really engage in when I was younger. That's something I
Yeah.
actually just renewed my passport because that's something I want to do more of. Because I really haven't seen much outside of those few places. I mean, Carrie and I used to go on spring break down to Key West, but that's all a little blurry because we were in
Yeah.
college and having a good time. But yeah,
Yeah.
I would say mainly Florida. That's where a lot of people go.
Okay. Um, and then when I think about Ohio, for places that I've never really been to, I mean, I was recently over the summer. I was in Columbus for an
Oh, okay.
overnight, but I can barely count that. Um, but there's a lot of cities that are like kind of almost like, I think I like iconic, or like kind of like so tied up in like the concept of Americana, whether it's like Cincinnati or Columbus or Cleveland or Dayton, like they all just seem kind of very, I don't know, like they're cities that but I don't know them at all. So I should really use this opportunity, quite selfishly, to cure myself of all my ignorance of Ohio. So, like, what I guess I guess I could start by just asking, like, do you feel like there's any misperceptions of Ohio?
The funny thing is you kind of go through life, and like you and I were talking, I think with the first time we talked about how you don't realize that you're in your own little bubble, like with your ego and the people who think the same or similar to you. And obviously, I'm a social worker, so I'm liberal, and I look at things, um, similarly to like my friends in big cities. But in Ohio, I with the last couple of elections, I really noticed how much of the minority I actually was. Um, and so there are those of us that are wanting change and believe in women's health care and all those and transgender rights and all that kind of stuff. But I will say that, and I don't know if it's a misconception, there is quite a large population of people who tend to lean more towards conservative views and religious reasoning for that. And so that's one thing I think that's challenging. I mean, the thing I love about Ohio is, I mean, I do think we have beautiful weather. We don't have to worry about, hurricanes or earthquakes or any of that. I love the seasons. There's a lot of beautiful areas, especially when you get down into southern Ohio, where they're more hilly and mountainous, and those kind of things. But so when you go to the cities like Columbus, I went to Ohio State, and Columbus was more open minded. It was more that, I remember, I remember because I grew up in a town that had very little diversity here, especially when I was young. That has gotten better. But I remember going to Columbus and, being a freshman in college and realizing that nobody knew what time I was coming in or what I was doing. And I had always been a rule follower in high school. So I was like, I remember that moment. The first day my parents dropped me off, and Carrie and a bunch of us decided we were going to go to a friend's house for a party. And I remember standing on High Street thinking, nobody knows where I'm at, what time I'm coming home, what I'm doing. Because thankfully there were no cell phones at the time. Right. So
Yeah, yeah.
and it was my first exposure to something different than what I was raised in. And I was really fortunate to have parents that were very open minded and welcoming. I never remember thinking I wasn't allowed to be friends with someone or date someone or anything that was different than what um, they identified as. But being in a city was my first experience of really looking at diversity in a different way and having that experience, and becoming a social worker and getting into that field, and it was really exciting for me. But back to your question about misconceptions of Ohio, um, a lot of times people ask us that if that's where potatoes came from. They mix us up with, so they kind of put all of us,
Idaho.
like, yeah, they kind of put Idaho, like
Oh
there's
my
a
god.
there's a whole
Oh my
bunch of us
gosh.
getting lumped together, and or they'll be like, "Is that corn? Like, what do you got going on?" um, so so yeah, there's a little bit of that. Um,
Hmm.
very. I think the expectation is that most people are middle class, families and little communities. And there is a lot of that. But I think people would be surprised at, how much poverty there is in Ohio,
Hmm.
especially when you get down into southern Ohio. Um,
Hmm.
so, but I'll have to think about that a little bit more, Michael. I'm not sure. What kind of things have you thought about when it comes to Ohio?
You know what? I don't.
You can be
I think
honest. You won't hurt my feelings.
no. I I think I have to. I'm going to give a very long-winded answer.
Okay.
Because I kind of feel like when I graduated from high school in '89, so right about the same for you as you, and I had a Navy ROTC scholarship, and I really wanted to travel. I wanted to see things. I grew up on Long Island, and you know, when I was in college, and then when I had the opportunity to travel with the Navy, I was like, I want to see the world, and I realized that was kind of part of a larger context because at the age when we were coming out of high school and coming out of college, the whole world was opening up in a way it had never opened up before because the Berlin Wall had come down. There was no war or Soviet Union. The internet was not the internet, but I guess like just kind of digital connectivity was happening, and then the internet, and the world got a lot smaller. So I wanted to learn about all these countries and travel all these countries, and I got to do a lot. But what I realized only recently was that I I had always been curious about all these other countries and continents and every place else, and that was great. But I never really was curious about my own country. So like I even hesitate to say what if I have like a conception or a misconception of Ohio, because I don't really know enough to even say something that I have a strong prejudice one way or the other. Like I think a lot of people have a very bad misconception of New York City. New York City has its problems for sure, but if you choose your media source, you're going to see one problem or another all the time. And there's so many of us that are just kind of living lives. I mean, up and down the economic ladder. Like people are just trying to get by, and just live life like anybody else. So I guess when I think of Ohio, I think of I don't know if I were to reveal what little I know or what I would expect, I would guess I would think of Ohio as a place where there's probably a lot of closed factories and people love football. But that's but I say that very hesitantly. Say like, I don't have any strong feeling
Yeah.
about that. That's just what I would lead with.
Well, and I think especially in smaller towns, I mean, industry is a big issue, finding jobs. If people don't work at the hospital or at the school, then pretty much what's left is either seasonal work, working at the marinas, um, or factories. And even the factories in town, we only have one that's still open, the other one shut down. So a lot of them are going out to like communities 20 minutes away, 30 minutes away and working. Um, so there's truth to that. I think we
Mm-hmm.
love football when we have a good football team. Like when my daughter
Mm-hmm.
was in school, our football team was doing really well and it was packed and everyone was having fun. And then when things changed, of course, I think the support changed a little bit. But I think one of the things I like about Ohio, or the town that I'm in at least, is that I really do feel a sense of community here. Small towns have their issues and, um, things like that. But just a lot of support. Like when I went through the loss of my husband and my mom, just a lot of, like you can imagine it, people bringing food over and, like checking on you. And I had just started my job at the school. Last year was my first year. So I didn't have a lot of leave built up. And it was just all of the administrators, wanting to make sure that I took the time I needed. Um, and so, and I work with a lot of families who need service support, and I can call the people I know and everybody will do their best to make it happen. Like I have some children that were recently taken in by another family, and when they were taken in, they didn't have any of their clothes or anything. And they've only been back in our school today. And already people are bringing clothes to me and shoes and gift cards. And so there really is that sense of, it's kind of like, your brother. And I have a brother and we could fight with each other, but if anyone said anything about him, then I was protective and vice versa. It's kind of like that in a small town. Like we can bicker
Mm-hmm.
amongst each other, but when it comes to, somebody having a problem or a rough time, everybody kind of rallies for that person. So there very much is that sense of community um, for a small town. Um,
What can I ask? Do you know what the size is of your town as far as population?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and it's changed. So you know what? I'm going to Google it, Michael. Let's Google, because I don't think it's the same as what I used to think it was. So I don't want to give you the wrong information.
Hmm.
Population 6,025.
Wow.
Is that wow big or wow small?
I just wow, contextually it's pretty small because my
And
one
then you
little
figure
neighborhood of like a yeah.
it triples in the summer. So then we would go up to a
Okay.
whopping 18. Um, but yeah, it's pretty small. Everywhere you go, there you are. So
Yeah. And so everybody, like you've grown you go out and probably pretty much everybody walking around at
yeah,
the
a
store.
lot. I mean, my kids used to get annoyed when we would go to Walmart because, Mom, don't talk to anybody. Because, you'd run into people, and that's where you always ran into people was at Walmart. Um,
Hmm.
uh, so yeah, there's definitely that stereotype tends to be true. You're going to run into somebody, somewhere you go. Um, But yeah, for the most part.
I'm reading this book about neighborhoods, and the guy, his name's Seth Kaplan, and he writes about how that's really like and it's a take on another book, which was, I think, Bowling Alone, which was written about 15, 20 years ago, where it just talks about like kind of the breakdown of neighborhoods and how, we don't have any of any of those institutions anymore that we used to have. I mean, it sounds like you do, which is very fortunate, and probably is less common, certainly than maybe in prior generations. But one of the things that he talked about, and it ties to another podcast I had where I talked to a woman who was I guess she's like a descendant of a very famous Native American chief from like 1900, and she was talking about the difference between like elders and old people, and like the elders kind of were like, I guess, like kind of conduits of the wisdom of prior generations. And it got me thinking about how this day and age, and my parents did this too, most older folks, at least the the system is set up for you to retire and move away from where you raised your family. You're supposed to retire to Florida or someplace warm. And I'm sure that having your parents close by has its downsides as well. But certainly one thing that's lost when they do move away is you lose all that wisdom and support that they have.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because I had just got my dad a book, off of Amazon or something, and it's like a prompt where it'll ask him questions about his life growing up. It'll give him prompted questions, and then he can write down the answer. And so he's doing much better now, but he had some health issues where he was really kind of isolated to the home, except for when I would take him places. And I thought it would be good for him to do that, to put that together, because you're right. Like they tell you stories, but sometimes you're listening partially, or maybe it's the same story they've told and you're not paying attention to the details. Um, and so it's fun when we get together with my dad. My kids are very close to my mom and dad because of the co-parenting they really did for me with the kids growing up. And so my boys, about 4 years ago, my parents moved in next door, and my boys still, Drew goes over. He's like, I'm gonna go over and watch football with Papa or basketball with Papa. Um, and they're always engaging with him, um, which I feel really fortunate that they have. I don't think they realize how special that is, that time that they have with him. But I'm having them write those things down because they do. They're going to go and we're going to forget. We're going to forget those details, and and I do feel really fortunate. And yes, I mean, there are times where being close to your parents can probably be challenging. I've been really fortunate, though. I have had parents with really good boundaries. Like they never just showed up. They would always, sometimes we wouldn't see each other, because we live side by side. So it's like we're doing our own thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's funny because just yesterday, my dad calls my son and he's like, where, because we have this car that we're not really using and I'm determining what I'm going to do with it. Um, my dad's like, where's the Honda? Who took the Honda? So he must have been looking out the window, and it has to call like a nosy old man. Where'd the Honda go? Kind of thing. So but it's nice living next door and being able to go over. And I feel really fortunate that I can help him because he's been a great dad. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, people, and then we're actually thinking about selling our homes and moving in together. It was funny because when my mom passed away and then my husband passed away, my dad and I would go out together, and I would tell people I was dating my dad, because we would go. And the one day I picked him up, it was in the summer, and we were going to go uptown to listen to some live music, and because they shut down the downtown and have bands. And I picked him up, and I had like on these hot pink overalls, and I opened the door, and he's in a hot pink shirt, and I go, "No, we cannot go out wearing the same colors, Dad." He goes, "Well, I'm not changing." So, so being able to do those things together during that time was probably life saving for both of us. So,
Yeah.
we had an opportunity to even probably get closer than we would have. But we're talking about moving in together, and everybody's like, "You want to live with your dad?" And I'm like, "Well, I have a great dad, and he has good
Yeah.
boundaries." But I said, we'll have our own space. It's not like we're going to be sharing a room. But again, I feel like, he needs that support. And again, you can look at it one of two ways, and I choose to look at it like it's a great opportunity to spend some quality time with my dad and really have that connection with him in the last years of his life. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Like I said, you
Wow.
may see me in the paper, you know.
Yes. Everything is subject to
Right.
whatever happens,
So,
especially that trip to Florida.
well, and my thing is that again, he can go see my brother who lives in Columbus and is looking for a place in Florida, and I can travel, and then there's someone always at the house, So
Mhm.
I told him he has to leave me alone 6 months out of the year. So we'll see.
So, on a different tackle. So, like, may I ask about your work as a social worker?
Yeah.
What do exactly do you do?
Um, I had been working at a mental health and substance abuse facility for quite a while. And I was a supervisor, which I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what we do as an employee that's really annoying, that I'm
Mm.
sure I did at one time that I didn't realize until I was in charge of adults. Um, but I also realized that it was a great learning experience, and I loved the place I worked at. But my niche is working with families and kids. That's why I got into social work, and I missed that direct service. So when the principal at the one school I work at, there's two principals there at the school, and she had reached out to me and said that she thought they might be hiring for a social worker. But at the time, she said it probably won't be for another year or so, because I still think we're slow to get social workers in the schools in Ohio. It's kind of happening slowly. And then at the last minute, she called me and she said, no, the superintendent's decided to do it. Hurry up and apply. So now I work in it's a primary and an intermediate building. So it's one building, but they have pre-K through second with one principal, and then 3 through 5 with another principal. So I work both buildings. And really, excuse me, what I do is we kind of have a tier system where the majority of children fall in tier 1 and tier 2. And those are the kids that are just getting along pretty well. And if they do have a little blip on the screen, they respond to normal behavior modifications and things like that. And then there's the tier 3, that's about 3 to 5% of the population that has severe behaviors, usually trauma. Many of them live in poverty, and they are the ones that don't respond well to normal behavioral interventions. So we have a behavior team, um, and I tend to work with those kids one-on-one, and then I work with their families, helping to support their families and give their families the support and services that they need. Um, on Monday, we're doing a social emotional learning and mental health symposium where I'll be doing a breakout session. And the thing I like about this job is they let me be a little creative. So when my mom was the secretary at the middle school for years, 35 years, I think. And she was always concerned about kids not having enough to eat. And so I think we talked about this before, but this year was the first year I really had children saying they were hungry, like they were at school and they were like, I'm like, why are you tired today? And they'd be like, yeah. And I'm like, what happened? Why didn't I sleep last night? Why? I'm just hungry. And we have some food pantries around here, but again, they have very limited hours because they're ran by volunteers, and a lot of our families work. And so we started Carol's Cupboard, which is a food pantry just for our families where they can come and get extra food. Um, and the schools are just really supportive. The administration at the school I work at is just really supportive of whatever we want to try. We started bus covers, putting up bus covers throughout the area for the kids that have to stand out and wait for the bus in the bad weather. We connected with the vocational school, and the carpentry students put it together for us. And the local Rotary Club took it on as a project. So they're going to be putting some throughout the community. So I get to do a lot of different things. I get to do a lot of different things. And I also like, now this is my second year that I'm now really starting to get to know the families and the kids. The first year was kind of like getting my bearings of who was what, and now really getting to get to know them and have them feel that I'm someone they can come to when they need support. I think I take that as a big honor, because I think it's really hard to allow someone in your life, in a small town, when you know that maybe your life is not matching up to the requirements of many, So I feel very honored when they trust me to come in and be a part of their story and to help them. And um, I get a lot of, selfishly, I get a lot of um, positive, you know, uh, it's almost selfish because that's what makes me feel good, is to be able to do those things. So I get to do it every day, and I feel really fortunate for that.
Yeah. Um, how do you like? I mean, just for people, if you like, if you're in that kind of circumstance, um, do you think that does social media or like kind of like seeing all of the I don't know the vacations and the wealth and all the stuff that's out there, does that inspire or does that kind of more make people feel bad about themselves that they're not a part of what and we all know that social media is a gross distortion of reality in general, but what kind of impact does it have on those who are already kind of struggling a bit?
It's interesting if I think about it. Excuse me. I feel like the kids that are lower middle class probably have a harder time with that. Um, Wanting the Stanley Cups are a big thing right now, these fancy water bottles and wanting those status things. With a lot of the kids that I work with that are either in severe poverty or pretty poor, they don't have any exposure to anything outside of that. The ones that I work with are younger. When we get into the older grades, they have more access to phones. But it's very, I said this one time that when my daughter was little, back in the day, they used to do what they called talented and gifted. Do you guys have those classes in New York? Okay. So back then they did it when they were little. Now they wait until they're older. They realized, And my daughter was placed in a tag class. And I remember thinking, she's not really gifted. I don't mean to say that about my own daughter, but she wasn't really gifted. She had exposure to things. We took her places, we talked a lot. Um, and and so when she got older, she just, we realized she's not really a gifted student. She's just a well rounded, exposed kid. I see that sometimes with the children I work with that they live in a little bubble in their income based housing. A lot of them don't have transportation. We don't have really a public transportation system other than there's one octobus, but you have to schedule it and it's kind of a hassle. So we don't have, public busing that takes people places. So they get very locked into where they are. And I would say probably 70% of the family and children I work with come from one particular housing development in our town. And that they all ride the bus together. They're all together all day long. So they only see each other. Um, and so I don't see the social media and wanting to have more impact them, which in some ways is a disservice because I think when you're exposed to other things, you see a possibility of what could be different. And when you're not, you just don't even have that thought process that it could be different. Um, so but definitely with the lower middle class and middle class kids, they're looking at all that, they're wanting that, and trying to help them understand the reality of social media isn't always what you see. So I do see that with the older kids and the middle class kids, but yeah, the children that really struggle financially are kind of locked into what they know.
And can I like how much of I guess of this that you're working with I mean, is it connected at all to like factory closures in the past, or is it just what's the is there some kind of root like history to
I definitely think it's the
people's
change in
struggles?
small towns. It's the loss of
Mm,
industry. Um,
mm,
and, I think that, they say it takes 7 generations for families to come out of poverty. So I think
mm,
they, we have a high working poverty rate here in Port Clinton. So most of our families do work, but they're seasonal. And
yeah.
so it's limited work. So I think it's probably a combination of those two things. But
Mm,
definitely, we used to have more industry in town. So a lot of the families I work with, they clean hotels, which is busier in the summer, usually not as busy in the winter, obviously. They work at, the marinas, cleaning boats, cleaning fish, waitressing, which in the summer, great. But again, we also, because we don't have a really good public transportation system, a lot of them struggle to have cars that run. So getting to and from places can be really challenging. I mean, we don't even have a laundromat in town. So for
Oh
families
wow.
that don't have washer and dryers, they have to go where we call it Catawba, which if you don't have a car, they're not going to go. And there's one
Hmm.
laundromat. So a lot of the times at the school, we try to wash clothes and stuff for kids and families because that's just not available to them. Um, so
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, my mother was taking care of the three of us during the week, and um, we were a little bit more than maybe scraping by. But like, I remember, like with her car, when there was an alarm, like one of those warning lights would go on, she just kind of covered it because she didn't have any. She's like,
right.
I don't have the money to fix it. Like, whatever catastrophe it might require, I can't deal with it. So she just ignored it.
Yeah, and there's, and it's just like that whole like snowball effect. So if they
Yeah.
have a job and they're working and then their car breaks down and they can't get it fixed and then they can't get to their job and then they lose their job. It's just kind of this vicious cycle for families. I always say that, you know, um, the biggest issues I see in our town are housing. Finding housing is terrible. We have quite a bit of a homeless population. The problem is that our homeless population isn't sitting on the street. They're couch surfing. So it doesn't look like a home. You don't see people in downtown. Um,
Right.
and so I think it's easier to not, I don't know if ignore it is the right word, but it's kind of like the car thing. If I don't look at it, it's not really happening because it's not in front of my face. For those of us that work in education in our town, we know all the families that are homeless. And then we all know that there's no place to take them. So that's one of our
Yeah.
bigger issues. And then housing, and then car issues, when their cars break down, trying to help them get their cars fixed, transportation issue, um, are two of the bigger things that I see families struggle with all the time. I mean, every day I get a call of a family that is homeless, and the McKinney-Vento Act is the money they give schools to help provide places for families to live and to pay for it. When you find out that you have a homeless family in the area, and the problem is it's not that much money, and we don't have, like, it's not, we have a long-term issue. So we can put someone in a hotel room for a period of time, but we know it's going to take months to get them into a home, and we don't have that much money. We could use all that money on one family. So that's always our challenge, is figuring out, what to do so the children can come to school and be safe when we have very limited access. And I know they just put together a new task force for that. But we all know that those things take time. It's never a quick answer. So that's always my number one concern, and for families, is just the housing issue.
And it's funny because I guess no matter where you are, or no matter the politics, there. I mean, that obviously there's, you see pictures, and again, that could be distorted, but pictures of homelessness in L.A. and San Francisco, here certainly in New York, and even in small town Ohio. So it's kind of seems to be a problem that you think we should all kind of get more together on trying to somehow fix, instead of like fighting over, I don't know, silly things that really don't move it forward in any way.
Well, and we have, like, we're able to contract into another county for their homeless shelter. But then that moves the children out of their home school, number one. And number two, you can't, a lot of the shelters around here, you can't stay in if you have a felony of any kind. A lot of our families have struggled with drug and alcohol abuse, um, and things like that. So, then they can't even live in a shelter. So it becomes very, very challenging. Um, and then they did put up some new townhouses. I guess it's been about 5 years ago, maybe now. And they were full before they were even done. I mean, they had a waiting list already. So, and even really for middle class families, my daughter and her husband right now the housing market, has exponentially gone up. So homes in our area for our small town have tripled in price, but the income hasn't. So, I'm seeing a lot of families wanting to buy houses that they can't get, they can't afford them. So housing is definitely an issue.
Yeah. Wow. Need to get this into a more positive state of
Yeah.
conversation. Well, but no, but I think what I will say is like I feel like I do think the more that I've talked with people in other parts of the country, like when you're talking about like crazy increases in housing prices, I talked to a woman in Ohio, in Idaho, your sister state apparently,
Yes.
your doppelganger, and she was saying the same thing, and certainly in Brooklyn it's the same thing. So I don't know if that should make us feel any better, but I feel like the more you talk to people outside of your bubble, the more you realize that everybody seems to be facing the same problems. And I just wish that we'd all, I guess, get more real about trying to do the problem solving instead of just kind of looking, what we can blame or scapegoat or, um, demonize and take out our anger or frustrations on, as opposed to like trying to actually fix these things and taking lessons. Like maybe what works in Ohio isn't going to work in New York, but the state, it's the same battle, so why not like have people working together, and it could be
Yeah.
Ohio, it could be you know Kansas, Nebraska, South Carolina, whatever. I mean, there's homelessness everywhere. What are people doing? Well, we should be working together on these things, not bickering about stuff that is, I guess, not that it's not important, but maybe should take a back seat to these like kind of material issues.
Yeah, because I really think when push comes to shove, most of us want the same things. We want to have safe and affordable housing. We want to have jobs that we enjoy. We want our kids to be raised in safe environments and, be able to make decisions that are best for ourselves. And, we know that oftentimes the media can pit people against each other when at the end of the day, when you really talk to people, most of us want the same things similarly, those same rights and those same things for our family. So um, I agree with you. It's everywhere, and I think being a single mom and being a social worker and not making a lot of money, housing was always a struggle for me. And I was really fortunate in this small town that people knew me. And so, someone would come to me and be like, Sarah, do you need a place? A family friend, they still had their home and they rented it to me for very minimal amount of money. um, they took care of me during that time. But I had to navigate the system personally, having my children on Medicaid and looking at the housing issues. And so the gift of that was understanding what it is like to navigate a very challenging system, and understanding that um, helps me to have an understanding with the families that I work with. I can't stereotype. I can't make statements about people that are on the system, because that's what I did. I experienced that and I knew what that was like. And again, when you haven't, and that's what's so great about what you're doing, when you've never experienced something, you have an opinion about it. Once you experience it, it changes, right? Because now you can't make those blanket statements anymore because you have a different perspective.
Yeah. What was it like the first time you came to New York? Was it did it break any stereotypes that you had?
Yeah, actually, the first time I came to New York was I was still in college. Carrie had gone to the city and she invited me to come see her. And I remember I showed up. They had a car service pick me up. So I felt really fancy. I was probably, I don't know, maybe 21. And we stayed in her cousin's place on Fifth Avenue. So we stayed in this fancy place. But then Carrie and I went to a thrift store and got our outfits for the day. So I had like on a Jerry Seinfeld ruffled shirt, with like a velvet hat and some thrift store jeans. And she took me to my first gay bar. And um, had its, and my first experience in the gay bar was all the men were really attractive, and it was very depressing that none of them were going to be interested in me. And then my second was this lovely girl came up and asked me to dance. And so I went out and danced with her. And I remember her saying, "This isn't your typical scene, is it?" And I go, "No, this is my first time. How did you know?" She goes, "I could just tell." And um, so we had that experience. And then it was funny because we went shopping the one day. And I don't remember. I think Carrie took me into like a Sephora makeup store or something. And there was this very nice security man there who we walked in, said, good morning or whatever. So I was talking to him and he kept following me around the store and I was talking to him and looking at makeup and everything. And as we left, I said, "I don't know why people say that people in New York aren't friendly. Everyone's so nice. That man was so nice." And she goes, "Well, that's because he thought you were stealing." And I go, "What?" She goes, "Sarah, nobody talks to the security man that much in New York. He thought you were stealing." I go, "I don't think that's true." She goes, "No, it is." So, so stereotypes, I think, I thought everyone would be mean. They were not to me. Um, uh, and probably because the way my mindset is, I thought everything was amazing. I loved the busyness. I loved the eclecticness. I loved all the food places. I do remember being terrified in the taxi. I had never experienced, that kind of driving and, no following of any rules. Here in Port Clinton, we're turning on our blinker. We're waiting 3 seconds at the stop. So that was kind of exciting. And then I remember her cousins lived in Connecticut and their neighbors were Harry Connick Jr. and his wife. And I was really, like that was when he was kind of really mainstream at that time. And so we were pulling out of her cousin's house and I saw him out and I'm like hanging out the window, waving. She's trying to pull me in. She's like, "Sarah, Sarah." I'm like, "That's Sarah Connick Jr." So I was probably her worst nightmare when she's trying to be cool in the city because I was like, so, so from Ohio. And then I remember when she got married to Jerome, I was pregnant with my middle son. And I went out and her and I stayed together and then it was at her cousin's house in Connecticut. It was beautiful. And her brother Kip and I are both from Ohio, and Kip is standing there and he has on a navy blazer and a tie with khaki pants. And I'm pregnant, like 8 months pregnant with a floral dress on. And in come these people in their pink long gowns. And one guy was like in a turquoise suit and everybody. And I looked at Kip and he goes, "I've never felt more like I was from Ohio than I do." Just the style, just all of that. It was just it was a great experience. And I think, just, yeah, it was just so different than what I had experienced. It was just so different. But I loved it. But I think, Carrie always impressed me because she's lived there longer than she's lived in Ohio at this point. But I remember when I would go see her and she would just call a cab and she'd stand out and she knew where she was going and we'd get on the subway. And that all seemed a little bit overwhelming to me. And, she would always say, "No, you get used to it pretty quick." But I don't know. I can't say that I would have or wouldn't have. But at the time when I was young, I was really impressed by her comfort in the whole scenario. But yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, I think it takes time, but there's definitely a point where I think you've taken the subway enough to where it becomes second nature, and it's like little things. I don't know how long it takes. I mean, I moved here in '97 and I'd been coming here since '93, so I'm not quite sure what the magic formula was, but I've been here now for far longer than I've been anyplace else. So it's pretty good. Can I ask what would be your like? What's your perfect day? So away from work, you've got a weekend day.
Hmm.
What would you do?
A perfect day in the summer, I would get up and go for a walk. Um, I meditate. I started doing that about 3 years ago, which really helps me. So I would meditate. And I love to be by the water. Usually I'm at the beach. A lot of the times, the perfect day includes my grandchildren at the beach, and we have to find as many shells and rocks as possible. Um, Eat a lunch on the beach, come home a little sunburned, and take a nap, and then go out at night with my girlfriends and listen to live music and have a beverage on the water. A lot of the bars around here are close to the water. So, um, but yeah, that would probably be like my perfect day. In the winter time, um, in the winter time, I mean, I still do like they do things downtown, so there's usually bands and things like that. But I like to read, spend time with my family. I'm a pretty low key kind of girl, you know. I think that's why I'm kind of interested in doing some more traveling and having some more experiences because I can get. I've always been extroverted, but I have found in age that I have to have time to recover, you know. So if I'm around a lot of people, I need time to be alone, and I really do like my own company. So you know, I can be that total cliche of binging on a Netflix show, drinking a glass of wine, you know, and just laying on the couch on a Friday night and enjoying that quiet. And plus, now that my kids are older, I can kind of do whatever I want and it's quiet. I'm not running around like a crazy person like you probably are with your three. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so I have a little bit, I've never had this much downtime and I'm kind of enjoying it. But definitely spending time. I have great friends. And so I really enjoy spending time with my friends.
Mhm. Well, as you've been talking about the water, I guess I didn't really put one and one together because if you live in Port Clinton, that would suggest that there is a port, and if there's a port, you must be quite close to water. So,
Yes. Yep. You
how
are a
far away is the
smart
water for
man.
you?
Where I live right now, it's five
Yeah.
minutes from here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can get to it really quickly. And, you know, there is, we're about, well, if you take what we call the Jet Express, which is kind of like a big catamaran boat over to the islands, it's about 20 minutes to get to the islands. Um, but yeah, everything downtown, like our downtown area, everything's kind of by the water. So, um, and then have you ever heard of the Mayflies?
No. What is that?
So I just want to prepare you if you ever do come to Port Clinton around June, July, because if you've never experienced it, it can be very terrifying for many people. So we have what's called mayflies, and they hatch from larvae in the lake, and they come out, and they only live like a mayfly will only live for 24 hours. It can't eat or anything. They're bugs, and then when they die, they kind of smell like fish, and sometimes they've been so bad that they've had to take the snow plows to plow them off the street because they make the streets real slippery. Like you can have car accidents or you can slip on them. And they don't last very long and we're used to them. So like the downtown turns off the lights and you don't have any lights on because if you live close to the water, they'll be all over your car. Like you could probably Google mayflies in Port Clinton and there'll be pictures of cars that are completely covered with them. My daughter was getting gas one time, and this poor girl who'd never been in Port Clinton was trying to get gas, and they're all over the gas, you know, and she's crying. And Anna goes, "Are you all right?" And she goes, "How do I get gas? What are all these bugs?" Like she couldn't touch it. So people who've never been here are shocked by it. And you don't want to wear white because if you
Yeah.
go out in white, you'll be covered with them. Um, so yeah, and my dad will always tell the story. When I was a kid, he'll say they used to every night have to take the snow plows and scrape up all the mayflies. We have some seasons that are worse than others, but yeah. So if you ever come here in the summer, just know they're not going to hurt you, Michael. They stink,
Okay.
but you're safe.
Well, you just gave me a very kind of insider bit of knowledge. I'm going to show that off to every person I ever meet from Ohio for the rest of my life.
That's right. See, I'm glad that I
Yeah.
helped you today.
Thank you. So, and since I'm in the wine business as well, I like food. What is a quintessential like Ohioan dish, if there is?
Definitely in Port Clinton would be Jolly Rogers, which sells perch and walleye, which is fish here that people love. A lot of people that come from different parts of Ohio will drive here just for Jolly Rogers perch and walleye. So
Okay.
that is a big thing. People have fish fries a lot. That's a big thing, I would say. And it's so big that at New Year's Eve we have the walleye drop. So you guys have the Big Apple. We have a
Yeah.
giant walleye that it's very classy. It gets dropped from a large crane in downtown Port Clinton. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's kind of a fun little shtick that they do downtown. And but we have the walleye drop every New Year's Eve. So, and then we have the walleye
That's great.
festival
Uh
where
huh.
you can be the walleye queen.
Uh
So
huh.
there's a lot around the walleye here in Port Clinton. So
Mayflies and walleyes.
that's right. There you go. That's all you need to know.
I'm not going to tell Carrie that I wish she didn't know that we were going to be having this conversation, because
Yep.
then I could just drop that knowledge on her. But
She would
okay,
be so
well,
impressed with you.
well, I wish we could delve in longer, but I know my kids have been staying away from the living room for the last hour, and I don't think I can hold them at bay for much longer. And I'm sure you've got
Yeah,
maybe
my
some
son
Netflix to
just
catch
came
up
in.
on.
I heard
Okay.
him in the kitchen.
So, but I'd like to wrap up by asking you what gives you hope at the end of the day.
Um, what gives me hope at the end of the day? I mean, I really feel like my job and the children I get to work with um, remind me every day of what to be grateful for, and how important it is to help one another. So really feel so fortunate in what I do for a living, because every day I get the opportunity to experience things that give me hope. And our youth, I look at my grandchildren and my children, and I know, there can be lots of things that people say, but I'm really impressed by who they are and by what they offer this country and what they're going to offer this country. So I feel really hopeful when I look at our young people, and I am excited for them because I think they have an opportunity to, like you and I spoke earlier, to have um, just the knowledge that they can do what they want to do, and that they have so many things out there they can experience. And I think that's really exciting, and that inspires me. It inspires me. Our kids, I think, they inspire me.
That's wonderful. Well, that's a perfect way to close. So,
Thank you
well,
so much. It was
thank you
fun.
so much. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I've really enjoyed this. I appreciate it so much. The chance to get to meet you and learn a little bit about Ohio and Port Clinton.
Yeah, well, thank
So,
you. Maybe one of these days we'll meet and have wine and walleye.
yeah, that would be great. So that does have a nice ring to it.
It
So
does, right? Maybe that's our new
yeah,
job venture.
that's good. I mean you're already close to Jerome, so you should start trying to get him to like sponsor the wine and walleye event.
I'll get a little cart and a bike and I'll ride it around.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right. So thank you, and then thank you to all of our listeners and viewers out there. May you go out and explore our country with curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. All right. Thanks so much, Sarah. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too. Bye bye.
Thanks.